Through 3 weeks, college football has been anything but ordinary. Now, granted, this sport is never exactly ordinary, but this has been the wackiest start to a season I can remember in a very, very long time. And I just wanted to make a little quickie, although it might run a little long because all of my videos end up running long, but I wanted to make a little quickie just trying to make sense of what exactly we've seen through the first few weeks and what to make of everything that's been going on around the country. So I wanted to start with two perennial powerhouses that have been struggling very, very mightily. Those are Clemson and Ohio State. And the struggles for these two teams are apparent in very big ways in certain areas. So starting with Clemson, obviously they lost their opener to Georgia, and then they beat up on some FCS team in week 2, and then just this past week struggled mightily to beat Georgia Tech. It was a strange game that got delayed for several hours because of a storm, but it came down to a goal line stand, which they were able to make. It was a really wacky game, but they were able to come out on top, but that's not to say that they didn't struggle. Clemson has actually not allowed a single offensive touchdown this season, so you might be wondering, well, what's the problem then? And it's because, yes, their defense has been incredible, but their offense has been anything but. We've come to expect so many great things from the Clemson offense because I think they've had so many great quarterbacks in the past. Outside of that one bridge year with Kelly Bryant, obviously Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence have given us this idea of, wow, Clemson is so good on offense and they hold themselves to a standard of excellence at the quarterback position. But so far, DJ Uiagalelei has not lived up to that expectation. I really thought he would, and I didn't think it would take this long for him to figure it out because he still hasn't figured it out. Through 3 games, he only has 475 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Like, that's not good. And they've only played one good team, which was Georgia, and his pick 6 is what lost them the game. So, no idea what to make of Clemson's offensive situation. Their defense is spectacular. Speaks for itself, but if they don't figure it out on offense, this team, I don't think, because of the success of so many other teams like Oregon and Iowa and Penn State, I don't think Clemson controls their own destiny for a potential playoff berth anymore, because you could be staring down the face of an undefeated SEC champ, an undefeated Big Ten champ, an undefeated Pac-12 champ. Oklahoma still undefeated, and then Georgia and Alabama is a coin flip essentially. And whatever team loses the SEC championship game would probably still get it if both teams go into that game 12-0. So Clemson needs to figure it out in a big way because they need to get into the playoff via style points. And they have no style points so far this season. But I have no doubt that they'll be able to figure it out. Then up in Columbus, there are just questions all across the board. The defense at Ohio State is still extremely suspect, but the biggest problem thus far has to be, aside from the defense, also quarterback play with CJ Stroud. The redshirt freshman has not lived up to any and all expectations. He's been nothing short of terrible through 3 games, and it really hurts me to say. Yes, he's getting his stats in, sure. I could throw for the numbers he's throwing for behind that offensive line and with that talented of an offense, but Stroud has just been bad. He really has been. He misses his receivers with, extreme regularity. He misses them high all the time. It leads to interceptions. It leads to 3 and outs. The coaching staff clearly doesn't trust him anymore because in the second half against Tulsa, they just fed Travion Henderson the football and he did the rest. So now this is a run-centric offense as long as CJ's under center. I don't think they trust him to throw the ball deep. I don't think they trust him to throw the ball really at all. Unless a guy is wide open, you're just not going to hit him. And that's why you see a lot of throws from under center. You see a lot of play action because that's the only thing this offense can be successful at because they cannot pass the football effectively enough. They have to get the run game going. The defense has also struggled a lot. They made a couple of adjustments this past week with Kerry Combs not calling the plays, not even being on the sideline. He was up in the booth. And the defense still struggled against a Tulsa team that lost to UC Davis, an FCS school, and it's not a good look right now. Luckily for the Bucks, they play Akron this weekend, who is one of the worst FBS programs. They're 50-point favorites, and I'm not saying they're going to cover, but it's the definition of a tune-up game at a time that this team really needs a tune-up game. I personally would like to see a change at the quarterback position, at least attempted. I think this is the first game of the season we're going to see different quarterbacks under center for Ohio State, and I'm really excited to see how the other guys do. I'd love to see them play with the starters, but we can't all get what we want. So we'll see how Ohio State approaches the end of the non-conference schedule heading into Big Ten play, because the Big Ten is looking a lot better than people expected, and it might be rough sledding this year for Ohio State already with one loss. It might just be a down year in Columbus. They might not even be the best team in Ohio, because Cincinnati has played spectacular. They just went on the road to Bloomington and beat a solid Indiana team. So, Cincinnati's ranked above Ohio State in the polls, but they might just, be the best team in Ohio for the first time ever. So, good for them. Then there are teams that are still without blemishes on their records, but I still think have problems. The first of which is Oklahoma. Oklahoma has yet to win a game convincingly. They did beat Western Carolina like 75-0, but that's Western Carolina. They struggled to put away Tulane in week 1, and they really struggled with Nebraska last week. And I just don't know how that happens, because Nebraska is a very bad program as of right now. It's a team that lost to Illinois in week 1. It's a team that has no idea what's going on. The Scott Frost experiment in Lincoln has been a complete failure, and they only won by 7 points. And in fact, if it wasn't for a wacky blocked extra point return for 2, maybe it's a different outcome in Lincoln or Norman rather. And I don't know, it was just weird, and I don't have a lot of faith in Oklahoma. Their defense still has a lot of question marks, and Spencer Rattler just has not played up to his expectations. He's not even a top 5 Heisman candidate right now in my book. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Oklahoma drop some Big 12 games. Granted, the Big 12 is extremely weak, and they have no excuse to drop any games, but it wouldn't surprise me if it happened, just because they look extremely vulnerable. Another team is Texas A&M, and they haven't faced a real football team yet this season. They get Arkansas this week in a neutral site game at Jerry World, which could be a really, really difficult game for them. I'll get into that in a little bit. But Texas A&M, a lot of moving parts. Haynes King got hurt, the quarterback, so Zach Calzada has been under center for the last couple of games, and he's played well. He's played like a young kid, though, and I think that experience is a big factor for a team like A&M, because they have a lot of experience across the board, especially on offense, but under center they're extremely youthful. So I like Calzada. I like what I've seen from him so far, but I don't know if I have faith in him to lead A&M to a win in a big game. And then the third team I have a couple problems with is Notre Dame. Jack Cohn has been really good so far for them, but they have a lot of problems on the offensive line. It's a very young offensive line. Usually Notre Dame offensive line is fantastic, but this is a very young group, a lot of moving parts, and they haven't played their best football. And it's hurt the running game. It hasn't really hurt the passing game, but those problems could catch up to them, especially this week with playing a really, really stout Wisconsin defense. It wouldn't surprise me if Notre Dame were to drop that game simply because they're pushed around up front, which is something you should really never be able to say about Notre Dame. Then there are 6 teams that have surprised me so far this season, very pleasant surprises, and I'll just run through them really quickly. First of which, obviously, Penn State. Great start to the season for them. 2 ranked wins, week 1 going on the road to Camp Randall and beating Wisconsin. That was a huge win for them. And then last week against Auburn, in the whiteout, just 2 really huge wins for the Penn State program, which could go a long way in their not too distant future in terms of recruiting. Has them in a great position. I still think they're underranked by AP poll voters, but They're, AP voters, and a lot of them lack common sense. But that's a story for another time. Another Big 10 East team that has done really well this year, Michigan State. Sparty is 3-0 through 3 games, and man, they just look really good, especially offensively. Kenneth Walker, their running back, is the nation's leading rusher through 3 games, and he is just impossible to stop. He is an absolute monster out of the backfield, and I really like what I've seen out of him. Another monster is the quarterback of the Ole Miss Rebels, Matt Corral, and he has his team looking fantastic as well. Matt Corral maybe has the best, one of the best looking deep balls in the country. He has been torching every secondary that he's played. If the season ended right now, he'd probably have my Heisman vote. And Ole Miss is currently, I think, in the top 15 or 16. I think they're a lot better than that personally, but they're going to have to show it against SEC opponents. But yeah, good on Lane Kiffin and Matt Corral. Ole Miss is in a good spot right now. Then heading out west for a little bit, we got BYU, who has now won 2 consecutive ranked games against Pac-12 opponents. They beat Utah in week 2, and they just beat Arizona State in a very good game this past Saturday night. So now BYU is in the top 20. Not necessarily a playoff contender, but, they're a very solid group, and they've exceeded expectations so far. Coming back to the SEC, we have Arkansas. Arkansas has been great, really, through 3 weeks. Obviously, they pulled that, I don't want to say it was a massive upset of Texas, but they put Texas in the dirt. And it was a really, really funny showing, considering Texas's future, soon to be in the SEC. Arkansas led by their 2 Traylons, running back Traylon Smith and wide receiver Traylon Burks. They're both absolute beasts. I cannot wait to see Arkansas play Texas A&M this weekend. I think it's going to be a great game. And the last team I wanted to give a shout out to, usually they say you save the best for last, but in this case I'm saving the worst for last. But I do want to shout them out because they have looked impressive so far. Michigan. They haven't really played anybody either. They get Wisconsin in a couple weeks. That's a huge game, especially if Wisconsin beats Notre Dame this week. And I think that game will tell us a lot more about them. I even think this week's game against Rutgers will tell us a lot about Michigan. Because Rutgers is a 3-0 program right now. Greg Schiano doing good things in Piscataway. And I'm excited to see that game play out. So those are my surprise teams through 6 weeks. Some of them playoff contenders, looking at you, Penn State, and, maybe Ole Miss can do things in the SEC. Probably not, but Penn State can definitely run the table in the Big Ten and make the playoff. And then just a couple other teams I'm really pleasantly surprised about, and their programs are going in good directions. But speaking of just the future, obviously the games I referenced earlier, I'm super excited to watch this weekend. Notre Dame, Wisconsin, that game is at Soldier Field in Chicago. Going to be a good one. Texas A&M, Arkansas, also a neutral site game. I don't like the fact that that's a neutral site game. I don't know why it's in Arlington, but it is. I think if it was in Fayetteville, I would take Arkansas with no hesitation, considering how well they played at home against Texas. But that's going to be a Texas A&M home game, and it's going to be tougher. But I really like Arkansas. I don't know why. I'm not picking that game right now. I still need to put some more thought into it, but Texas A&M is certainly on upset watch. And then the underrated game I mentioned earlier, Rutgers and Michigan. 2 Big Ten East teams trying to get their programs back on track. Michigan has looked really good through 3 weeks, and Rutgers is 3-0, which is something that they can almost never say about themselves. They're no longer the laughingstock of the FBS. They're not even the laughingstock of their own division. So if Rutgers wins that game, that's a huge win for the program. And if Michigan wins, then they'll start, their Big Ten track this season on the right foot. So that's going to be a really interesting game to watch in terms of storyline. And then just to round things out, I wanted to give my updated top 10. So the top 2 was obviously unchanged. Alabama and Georgia, they are the cream of the crop so far in college football that probably won't change until they meet in Atlanta, unless one of them suffers a massive, massive upset. Number 3, like most people, I have Oregon right now. I've just seen more out of them than I have Oklahoma. I've actually bumped down Oklahoma a lot, and people might not like that, but I'll get into that when I get into them specifically. But I've liked what I've seen from Oregon thus far, and I think, they just have to not lose, and they'll be fine. The toughest game on their schedule was UCLA. UCLA just lost to Fresno State, so they won't be playing as inspired as they maybe once were, hoping they could get to the playoffs. So I think Oregon is on the fast track to the college football playoff. Number 4, I have Iowa. I think this has been the best team in the Big Ten. Penn State is right behind them at 5, but the only reason they have Iowa above them is just because there's just something about them that I really like, and they play in the Big Ten West, which is weaker this year than the Big Ten East, so I think Penn State is going to have rougher sledding. Penn State has a better resume right now, no doubt about it, but I just really love what Iowa's doing. I think Tyler Goodson is a legitimate Heisman candidate. I just love what he does out of the backfield. He's had a monster season thus far, so keep an eye on Tyler Goodson to make headlines in the Heisman conversation. Like I said, Penn State right behind them at 5, 2 ranked wins is huge for them. They've been 2 great wins as well. Just behind them, I have Cincinnati. This could be the first Group of 5 team to make the playoff. I think they have a great shot if chaos ensues above them. I love Desmond Ridder. I love what Luke Fickell's doing with his defense. They have weapons on offense. They can beat you in multiple ways. This is a really good team, and nobody wants to see them. Finally, clocking in at number 7, I have Oklahoma. This team has looked deflated. They've just not played up to par, and all the teams above them have looked significantly better than they have. I really think the difference between Cincinnati and Oklahoma is sizable. Number 8, I have Clemson. Again, quarterback problems. I have no doubt that they'll end up being fixed, but the offensive scheme is just really, really weak right now under Tony Elliott. DJ's play has been really weak, and the defense can carry them, especially in a terrible, terrible ACC. But how long can they do this for before someone inevitably upsets them? I mean, a team like Virginia has a prolific passing offense, and while Virginia doesn't play Clemson this year, if that were to be an ACC game for Clemson, they might lose because they would be outgained offensively. And so just weird times for the Clemson Tigers. 9, I have Ohio State. I'd love to see a change at the quarterback position, or at least an attempt at one. And so many questions on defense. It's just I'm ready to throw in the towel this year. Just it's wacky, and I want it to be over. Number 10, I have Florida. I never mentioned their performance against Alabama, but they took Alabama to the brink. They easily could have won that game. Just a couple mistakes here and there. A failed 2-point conversion late. They only lost by 2. They only lost by 2 to the best team in the country. They outgained them rushing the football. They looked significantly better rushing the football than Alabama did. I think Anthony Richardson is the long-term solution at quarterback rather than Emory Jones, but that's a story for another time. I still think Florida's in a good position. I think they're the biggest threat to Georgia right now in the East, and that cocktail party is going to be a hell of a game. I'm looking forward to it whenever it comes around. But that's my top 10. I wanted to give honorable mentions to Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, and BYU. Those are the teams, in no particular order. I'd probably have 11 through 14, with maybe Michigan State coming in close behind, and Arkansas also in that conversation. So those are in no particular order, but I gave my opinions on all those teams, and yeah, that's about it. So really wacky start to the college football season. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, but I'm slowly doing it, as we go along. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks as conference play starts to kick off across the country. I'm looking forward to seeing all these conference games and how these teams really, really look, and we'll get a better idea of that in the coming weeks. So that's all I have today. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the relevant buttons, the likes, the subscribes, the shares. You all know what to do. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.